Hey guys, what's going on? It's Clever Techie, and in this video we're gonna learn how to create a to-do list in JavaScript. This is what our completed project is going to look like. We're gonna be able to add new tasks to the list by either pressing on this button or pressing the Enter key. And we're also gonna be able to mark tasks as completed and delete tasks from our list by pressing the trash can icon. The first step is to download all the files that are included with this video. And you guys can either download a file called JavaScript to-do list project.rar, which will have just this projects file, which you can then extract inside of the existing Clever Techie's workspace, JavaScript projects folder. Or you can just download Clever Techie workspace, which will have all the updates, including all of this new projects files as well. Once you open the projects files in Visual Studio Code, you'll see an index.html file, style.css, and tasker.js. Now the tasker.js is going to be our main JavaScript core functionality, and index.html just has all the HTML, and the style file is already included, and the tasker.js file is included from our index.html file as well, so you don't have to worry about that. The rest of the files that you see here are visual aids to help us understand the project better, and we'll go into more details about those later in the video. Let's go ahead and open a file inside of our projects to-do list folder called tasker.1. And this is a OneNote file of all the steps that we're going to be completing and checking off as we go. So this will just makes it easier to stay organized and see what kind of functionality that we're creating. I'm just gonna go ahead and resize this window so I can have Visual Studio Code and view all the steps that we're going to be completing at the same time. Let's go ahead and open the tasker.js file and create the tasker object. So this is our tasker object, and all the properties and methods will go inside of it. So the properties are all the HTML elements that we're going to be working with. And if you open a file called JS variables, you'll see all the properties highlighted in green, preceded by the keyword this. So these are all the HTML elements that are linked to our property names, so that you can clearly see which HTML elements we're going to be working with. And in blue you can see the variable names, but don't worry about those for now because we're going to be covering them a little bit later. And if you open up a file called js-tasker object, you'll see a chart which summarizes all the properties and methods that we are going to be creating for our tasker object. Okay, so let's create our first element. Select elements, function, and now we'll create our 5 properties that we'll be working with. The first one is this task input, and here we're going to be using document.getElementById method to select our task input field. Now the getElementById is a JavaScript's built-in method, and if you guys open a JS document object file, you'll see that this is one of the methods that we'll be using in the video, getElementById. And if you also open a file called HTML elements, you'll see all the HTML element tags that we're working with along with their ID name. So the first property that we're creating, which is task input, has an ID of input task, input-task. So that is the HTML element that we are selecting with getElementById method. So let's go ahead and put input task, and now we have a property task input which selects our input task element. Now just to give you guys an even better understanding, let's go ahead and open our index.html file inside of the browser. And then I'm gonna go ahead and open Web Developer Web Console. And here, let's just go ahead and type document.get element by ID, and then provide the same parameter, which is input task. And then you'll see that this method with this property name, or this parameter name, is returning our input field. So if you click on this target icon, you can see that the JavaScript is selecting this HTML element. So that's how the get element by ID method works. Okay, let's go back to our tasker and create the rest of the properties. The next property is going to be our task list. And this one is going to be our main unordered list of the user tasks, which is the parent element of where all of our list items will go. So this third element we're going to call task list children, and we're going to use task list, which is our unordered list element, and here we're going to use an JavaScript's element property called children. So this will select all the list items that are within the parent element's unordered list. So if we open an element object, you can see that the element object has children property, and that's how we get all the HTML elements that are within the parent tag, that are within the parent element. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the rest of the properties. This add button is going to be selecting our button so that we can add the new tasks to the to-do list. And this error message, which will display the error message if the input field is empty. Okay, so now we have all of our properties and we are done with the select elements method, so we can mark this as complete and mark all the rest of the steps as completed as well, since we've already created all the properties. And now we can move on to the next method called build task. The build task method will create a list item HTML of the user task that is being added to the to-do list. And if we open up the JavaScript variables, the task list item is all of this HTML that our build task is going to be creating. So that will include the task checkbox, task value, task trash icon, task button, and so all of those things, the build task method will build all of that HTML, and that's what our method is going to do. Alright, so let's go ahead and create build task function. And the first thing we're going to do here is declare variables: task list item, task checkbox, task value, task button, and task trash. So here we're just declaring those variables without initializing them. Alright, that step is done, and now let's move on to creating task list item, which is the element with document create element method, and set the attributes with element set attribute method. So task list item equals document create element, and the create element method is how we create the actual HTML element using JavaScript's built-in document method. So once again, if we open up the document object JavaScript file, you can see that here we have a create element method, which is one of the methods of the JavaScript's document. Alright, and now we're gonna set the attribute of our list item. So here we're using the same variable name, task list item, and here we're gonna use set attribute method and set it to class task. So what this is going to do is going to create the li HTML element and set its attribute class equals to task. So if we look at the element object, you can see that we have a set attribute method, and what the set attribute does is it adds the attribute to our created HTML element. And whenever we want to test the code, we can just copy the code that we want to test and then go back to the web console, paste the code in here, and then we can just type task list item, which is the name of our variable, and you can see what the JavaScript actually created. You can see that it has created the list item with the create element method, and it also added the attribute class with a value task with the set attribute method. Alright, so that's how that works, and now we're done with this step, and let's move on to creating the task checkbox input field and set its attributes. And the checkbox is going to be used for marking the task as complete from our to-do list. So let's go ahead and create the checkbox. The name of this variable is task checkbox, and here we're also going to be using document.createElement to create our HTML element, but for the value we're going to put input because the checkbox is an input field. Then we're also going to set the attribute of the checkbox, and we're going to say the type of our input field is going to be equal to checkbox. Alright, so we are now done with the checkbox, so we can go ahead and check this step off. And the next thing we're going to create is task value, which is going to be the text of our to-do list item. And for that, we're going to use create text node method, which creates text inside of the HTML element. And this is a document objects method, which is a built-in JavaScript method. The value that we're going to be extracting is going to come from the task input property. And if we look at our variables chart, this is our task input property, which is the main text input field where the user is typing in the value of the to-do list task. So that's where we're going to be extracting the value from. Alright, so let's go ahead and create task value. Task value equals document.create text node, and for the property we're going to provide our task input property dot value. Okay, so that will create the task value, so we can check this off. And now let's go ahead and create the task button. And the task button is going to be our delete button that will let us delete tasks from the list. So we're going to go ahead and create the task button with document create element and use button as a parameter. Next, we're going to create that trash icon so that our button looks good. And for that, we're going to set the task trash variable document create element, and for this property we're going to use I. Then we're going to set the task trash attributes with set attribute class, and we're going to set it to FA trash, which is the font awesome icon for the trash can. And the final thing we're going to do to finish up our button is we're going to insert the trash can icon into the button. And the final thing we're going to do to finish up our button is to insert the trash can icon into the button. And for that we're going to use a append child method. We're going to say task button append child and use the task trash variable as a parameter. So by using the append child method, it's going to insert the child element task trash into the parent element task button. Okay, so we are now done with the button, so we can go ahead and check off all these steps here. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to append task checkbox, task value, and task button to the task list item. So we're going to be appending the task checkbox value and button to our task list item using the same technique as we just did with the button. Alright, so we're going to append elements to task list. And we're going to say task list item, append child, and use task checkbox. So that will insert the checkbox inside of our task list item element. I'm going to say append child again, and append with task value. And the last one is the button. Task button. Okay, so if we open up the variables chart again, so this is our main task list item, and the checkbox, value, and the button are all the elements that we have just appended to our main task list item. Alright, so we can go ahead and check off this step, and the last step within this method is to append the task list item to the task list parent element. So here I'm going to say add task to task list. So here we're going to be adding the task list item li element to our parent element, which is this task list. So if you remember, the task list is our unordered list. Within this unordered list are the list items. So now all we have to do is append the task list item to our task list parent. So we're going to use our task list property, append child, and add task list item. And first, let's call the select elements method to create all of our properties. And then let's type in some kind of value here for the task. And then type tasker build task. And as you can see, JavaScript has gone ahead and added our task to the list. And it has created the checkbox, the text, the trash icon, and all the other HTML for us. So we are now done with the build task method. So we can go ahead and check this off. And now let's move on to the next method, which is error. All right, let's go ahead and add the error method. And all we're going to do is set the error message property style display value to block. So the default style is set to none, and the block is going to show the error message. Alright, so that's our error method. Now let's move on to the next one, which is add task. Let's create the add task method. And the add task is going to actually add the new task to the list. So whereas the build task, so as opposed to the build task, which actually builds all the HTML of the task, the add task is going to add the actual task to the list with a button. And now let's create the next method, which is add task. And the add task is going to add the new task to the list. And the first thing we're going to do is declare an initialize task value variable with task input value, which is the value of the task input that the user is entering. So we're going to say let task value equals this task input dot value. So that will extract whatever value the user is entering for the to-do list. And then we're going to set the error message style display equal to none, which will initially hide the error message. Then we're going to test to see if the task value is empty. And if the task value is empty, we're going to call our error method. And so this will call the error method, and instead of the default error message style display equals none, it's going to set it to block. So that will reveal the error message if the task input value is empty. Else, we're going to call build task, which will add the task to the list. And then we're going to also reset the task input value to empty string. And the last thing we're going to do here is call the scan task list method. Scan task list, which will add click events to checkbox and delete button to the new task. But since we don't have the scan task list, let's just go ahead and comment this out for now, because we're gonna create this method last. Okay, so we can now check off the last step, and we are now done with the add task method. Let's move on to the next one, which is the enter key. Let's create the enter key method, and we're gonna pass the event as a parameter. And here we're gonna test if the event key code is equal to 13. Now the key code 13 tests the event for the actual enter key on the keyboard. And another way to test this, so we're gonna say or event which is equal to 13. So that's just another way to test for the enter key. And so if the enter key has been pressed, we're going to call our add task method. And that's all we're going to do for the enter key method. So we can now check this off. The next method we're going to create is bind events. The next method we're going to create is bind events method. And the bind events will bind add task method to the add button on click event. And it will also bind the enter key that we've just created to the task input on key press by using the element.bind, which is JavaScript's built-in element method. And the bind method is used whenever we need to attach another method to an event. So let's create our bind events method. And first we're going to add the click event to the button. So here we're going to use our add button property, and we're going to call the onClick event, and we're going to attach the add task method by calling the add task, and then we're going to use bind on our method and pass this as the parameter. So that will attach the add task method to the add button on click event. So whenever the add button is clicked, the add task method is going to be called and the user task will be added to the list. And in a similar way, we're now going to add the enter key with task text box. So here we're going to use our task input property, and we're going to use the onKey press event, and we're going to bind the enter key method in the same way that we did for the button by passing this as a parameter. So now our button and our enter key will be functional. And we are now done with the bind events method, so we can go ahead and check this off. And before moving on to creating our next method, let's go ahead and test out our code. So let's go to index.html and open the file in the browser, and let's just enter some task and try adding it to the list by clicking on the plus button. Okay, so nothing happens. Let's go ahead and open Web Developer, Web Console, and see what's going on. Okay, so let's first call the tasker select elements, and then tasker bind events. Now let's try adding the element to the list, and we get a type error message. This error message is undefined, so it looks like I made a mistake somewhere in the code. So let's go back to tasker.js, and yeah, I do have a mistake in my error. Should be ERROR. Okay, so let's go ahead and fix that. And let's just check to make sure. Oh, okay, so I have another error here. Same thing. Should be spelled ERROR. Okay, let's save the file, go back to the browser, refresh the page, and let's go ahead and test this out again by calling select elements, tasker.bind events. Now let's try adding the task to the list by either pressing the enter key or the add button. And now our task has been added to the list. Let's try adding the task without entering any text to see if the error message works. And we get an error, please enter task. So at this point, everything is working. The next step is to create scan task list method so that we can add on-click event to our checkbox and the trash can icon so that we can mark tasks as complete and delete the tasks from the list as well. The next one we're going to be creating is a scan task list method, and this one is going to add on-click events to the checkbox to mark them as complete and incomplete, and it'll also add the on-click event to the delete button so that we can remove the task from the list. And in order for us to add all these events, all these click events to our checkbox and the trash icon, we're going to need to loop through the task list children property. And just to show you guys what I mean, here's the completed project. And in the web console, if I enter tasker task list children, you're going to see that it's in fact an array of our list elements. So these are all the individual list items that the user has added, and you can see that it's a HTML collection of an numeric array. So that's why we're gonna have to loop through all the individual list items so that we can add the click event to mark the task as complete, and also add the click event to the trash can button so that we can delete each individual task from the list. And if we look at our variables chart, you can see that we have a this task list children property, and it refers to all the individual items on the list in our task list. Alright, so let's go ahead and create the scan task list method. Scan task list function. First, we're going to declare variables task list item, checkbox, and delete button. And now we're going to loop through all the list elements. For that, we're going to use a for loop. Going to set I equals 0, which is going to be our counter. Going to say I is less than this task list children, which is the collection of our children array. And we're going to use the dot length property, which is going to be the length of the array. So the loop will continue until it reaches the end of the array. And then task list item is going to be our task list children, and here we're going to use the counter, so that will get the current task list child item. And now we are ready to select the current checkbox and the delete button. Okay, so for the checkbox, we're going to say task list item, which is our current list item, and we're going to use the get elements by tag name method. And for the property, we're going to put input because checkbox is. And for the array index, we're going to use 0 because that's going to be the only value inside of the array. So we want the first one. And the delete button, we're going to use the same thing, task list item, and we're going to use get elements by tag name. And here we're going to use the button, and also put 0 for the array counter. Okay, so at this point we are ready to bind the onClick event to the checkbox and the delete button. So bind onClick event to the checkbox first. So checkbox onClick equals this. And here we're going to be binding the complete task, which we'll create later. And this will just mark the task as complete. So we're going to bind this, and we're also going to pass 2 arguments to our complete method, which is going to be our current task list item, so that we know which item we're going to be crossing off. And we're also going to be passing the checkbox so that we know which checkbox has been checked. Okay, and lastly, we're going to add the click event to the delete button. So in the same way, delete button on click, we're going to bind the delete task method, which we'll create later using the bind method. And here we're also going to be passing this and the I counter so that we know which list item element we're deleting. And that's it for our scan task list method. So we can go ahead and check all these steps off. Okay, let's create the delete task method next, which will delete the user task from the list. And we're going to be doing that by removing the child element task list children from our task list parent by using the argument from the scan task list method. So this is the counter that we're passing to our delete method here so that we know which current child to delete from the list. So let's go ahead and add the delete task method. And we're also going to pass that I counter as the function argument. And then we're just going to say this task list children and use I as a parameter so that we are selecting our current task list element. And then we're just going to simply call the remove method to remove the task from the list. So we can now mark this step as complete. And before moving on, let's go ahead and test to see that everything is working. And let's go ahead and uncomment this scan task list from our add task method so that the scan task list is automatically called and the delete button method is automatically added to our trash can icon. Also, comment out the complete task line for now, because we don't have the complete task method yet. Then let's go back to the index page, view it in the browser, and then go to web console, and let's call the select elements and bind events. And now let's add some tasks to the list. And then click on the trash can icon to see that our delete task method is working. And here we get a type error, task list children I is undefined. So it worked for the first 2 tasks, but something is happening on the last one. And the reason for that is because we are not resetting our I counter. So we keep adding these tasks, but the scan task list method is not called, and so JavaScript is getting the counters messed up. And to fix that, we just simply need to call scan list after removing each task from the list. So we're going to do this here by this scan task list, and that should fix the problem, because after removing each task, the scan task list is going to be called and the proper counters will be added to our buttons. So let's go ahead and test this out again. And we're going to open up the console, select elements, bind events, add tasks to the list. And now let's try removing the tasks once again. And everything is working beautifully. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one, which is complete task. Alright, let's create complete task method. And so this one is going to mark user task as complete, so the task is going to be crossed out. And we are going to pass variables task list item and checkbox as method arguments. So let's go ahead and supply that here. So these are the arguments that we're passing here from the scan task list. So let's go ahead and uncomment this line. And we are binding the complete task to our checkbox on click event. And we're passing the task list item, which is our current task list children item. And we're also passing the checkbox so that we will know if the checkbox has been checked. So we are now done with this step. And the next one is to check if the checkbox is checked. So let's go ahead and do that. So if checkbox checked, that's easy. Then we're going to set the task list item property class name to task completed. And that will cross out the task as completed. Else, we are going to call the incomplete task method, which we'll create next, which is simply going to reset the class name to the original task class so that the item is not crossed out. And so we are now done with the complete task, and let's go ahead and just create the incomplete task next to finish this up. Incomplete task function, and here we're also going to be passing task list item as our element object, and we're simply going to say task list item class name and set the property to task, which will uncross our item. Okay, we are done with that. So let's mark that as complete. And the final method we're going to create is construct method, which will simply call select elements, bind events, and scan task list method for us. So we don't have to do that by ourselves in the web console. So let's go ahead and create construct function and call all these methods here. Bind events and scan task list. And now let's open our index.html, and we're going to add the onload event to the body and call our tasker construct method. And by doing this, our tasker object's functionality gets loaded automatically. So let's test everything in a browser. At this point, everything should be working. So let's go ahead and add some tasks to the list. And now let's try crossing off some tasks and uncrossing them, deleting tasks, and everything is working great. And we are now done with our JavaScript Tasker project. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's check off the final step, and we are now done with our Tasker project. And if you guys would like to support Clever Techie, I would hugely appreciate if you sign up for my Patreon. That way, you'll get to download the workspace and all the additional files that come with this video, including the source code, the cheat sheets, and everything else that you see in this video. Hope you guys like this video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Clever Techie out.